When considering notching a ceiling grid for Wiremold, it's essential to understand that the ultimate authority rests with the building owner. They are responsible for ensuring all alterations comply with local building codes and regulations. While generally, notching a ceiling grid for Wiremold might not directly violate building codes, specific requirements can vary based on local regulations. Firstly, some codes emphasize maintaining the structural integrity of the ceiling grid. Secondly, ensuring the Wiremold is securely attached and doesn't interfere with the ceiling system's operation is important. Thirdly, installing fire stops to maintain the fire rating of the ceiling assembly may be necessary. It is also imperative to review the lease agreement with the customer, the lessee, to identify any restrictions on building alterations. Certain leases mandate obtaining the building owner's consent before modifying the ceiling grid. Considering the impact on ceiling integrity, notching might slightly weaken the structure. However, proper execution should prevent significant compromise. Regarding cleanliness, keeping the Wiremold flush against the wall presents a cleaner appearance. Offset Wiremold could be visually unappealing and potentially pose a tripping hazard. Therefore, consulting the building owner is advisable to determine if notching necessitates a permit or approval. The owner can offer guidance on specific code requirements or concerns. By securing necessary approvals and adhering to proper installation, the Wiremold installation will meet regulations and preserve the ceiling system's integrity. Building codes may include various considerations. One consideration may involve maintaining the fire resistance of the ceiling assembly. If the ceiling is part of a fire-rated assembly, any penetrations, including those for Wiremold, must be properly fire-stopped to prevent the spread of fire and smoke. This may involve using specific fire-rated sealants, sleeves, or other approved methods. Another consideration may involve the weight and support of the Wiremold. The ceiling grid is designed to support a certain amount of weight. If the Wiremold and its contents are too heavy, it could overload the grid and cause it to sag or collapse. Therefore, it's important to ensure that the Wiremold is properly supported and that the weight is distributed evenly across the grid. There may also be requirements for accessibility to the Wiremold for maintenance and repairs. Building codes often require that electrical wiring and equipment be accessible for inspection and maintenance. This may mean that the Wiremold must be installed in a location where it can be easily reached and that there is sufficient clearance around it for workers to perform their duties. Additionally, building codes may address the issue of aesthetics. While notching the ceiling grid to keep the Wiremold flush against the wall may improve the appearance of the installation, it's important to ensure that the finished product is neat and professional looking. This may involve using appropriate trim or covers to conceal the notched areas. Furthermore, it's important to consider the impact of the Wiremold installation on other building systems. For example, if the Wiremold is installed near sprinkler heads, it's important to ensure that it does not obstruct the sprinkler spray pattern. Similarly, if the Wiremold is installed near HVAC ducts, it's important to ensure that it does not interfere with the airflow. In addition to building codes, there may also be other regulations or standards that apply to the Wiremold installation. For example, the National Electrical Code, or NEC, contains requirements for the installation of electrical wiring and equipment. The NEC covers a wide range of topics, including the size and type of conductors, the methods of wiring, and the grounding and bonding requirements. It's important to be familiar with the NEC requirements that apply to the Wiremold installation. Another important consideration is the potential for future changes or additions to the building. If the building is likely to be renovated or expanded in the future, it's important to plan for these changes when installing the Wiremold. This may involve leaving extra space in the ceiling grid or using flexible conduit that can be easily rerouted. Finally, it's important to document the Wiremold installation. This includes creating a detailed drawing of the installation and keeping records of all materials and equipment used. This documentation can be helpful for future maintenance and repairs. Ultimately, the decision of whether to notch the ceiling grid for Wiremold penetration is a complex one that requires careful consideration of a variety of factors. By consulting with the building owner, reviewing the lease agreement, and complying with all applicable building codes and regulations, you can ensure that the Wiremold installation is safe, code compliant, and aesthetically pleasing. When discussing the fire rating of the ceiling assembly, it's crucial to understand what constitutes a fire-rated assembly and the importance of maintaining its integrity. A fire-rated assembly is a building component such as a ceiling, wall, or floor that has been tested and certified to resist the spread of fire for a specific period of time, typically measured in IRs. The fire rating indicates the amount of time the assembly can withstand exposure to a standardized fire test without collapsing or allowing fire to penetrate through it. Maintaining the fire rating of a ceiling assembly is essential for protecting occupants and preventing the spread of fire throughout the building. When penetrations are made in a fire-rated ceiling, such as for Wiremold, the integrity of the assembly is compromised and the fire rating is reduced. To restore the fire rating, it's necessary to install fire stops or other approved methods to seal the penetrations and prevent the passage of fire and smoke. Fire stops are typically made of materials that are fire-resistant and expand when exposed to heat, effectively sealing the opening around the penetration. There are various types of fire stops available, including fire-rated sealants, sleeves, and collars. The type of fire stop required will depend on the size and type of penetration, as well as the fire rating of the ceiling assembly. It's important to select fire stops that are specifically designed for use with electrical wiring and equipment, and that are listed and labeled by a recognized testing laboratory such as Underwriters Laboratories or UL. In addition to fire stops, other measures may be necessary to maintain the fire rating of a ceiling assembly. For example, if the Wiremold is installed near recessed lighting fixtures, it's important to ensure that the fixtures are also fire-rated and that they are properly installed. Recessed lighting fixtures can create a significant fire hazard if they are not properly installed and insulated. They can overheat and ignite nearby combustible materials such as insulation or wiring. Fire-rated recessed lighting fixtures are designed to prevent this from happening. They are typically equipped with thermal protection devices that will shut off the fixture if it overheats. They are also constructed with fire-resistant materials that will help to contain a fire if one does occur. When installing Wiremold in a fire-rated ceiling, it's important to follow all manufacturer's instructions and to consult with a qualified fire protection engineer or building code official to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements. Failure to properly fire stop penetrations in a fire-rated ceiling can have serious consequences, including fines, legal liability, and, most importantly, the risk of fire and injury. Furthermore, considering the weight and support of the Wiremold system is vital for the ceiling's structural integrity. Ceiling grids are designed to support a specific weight load. Overloading the grid can lead to sagging or even collapse, posing safety risks. When installing Wiremold, distribute the weight evenly across the grid. For heavier installations, use additional supports such as independent suspension wires to transfer the load to the building's structure. Consult the ceiling grid manufacturer's specifications for weight limits and recommended support methods. Ensure that the chosen supports are compatible with the grid system and can handle the weight of the Wiremold and its contents. Neglecting weight considerations can compromise the ceiling's stability and create a hazardous situation. Adhering to the manufacturer's guidelines and implementing proper support techniques are crucial for a safe and reliable installation. Accessibility for maintenance and repairs is another key factor to consider when installing Wiremold. Building codes typically mandate that electrical wiring and equipment be accessible for inspection and maintenance. This means that the Wiremold should be installed in a location where it can be easily reached and that there is sufficient clearance around it for workers to perform their duties. Avoid installing Wiremold in locations where it is obstructed by other building components such as ductwork, piping, or equipment. If the Wiremold must be installed in a difficult-to-access location, consider using access panels or other means to provide access for maintenance and repairs. Ensure that access panels are properly sized and located to allow workers to safely and easily reach the Wiremold. In addition to providing physical access to the Wiremold, it's also important to consider the accessibility of the wiring and connections within the Wiremold system. Use removable covers or access plates to allow workers to inspect and maintain the wiring without having to disassemble the entire system. Label all wiring and connections clearly to facilitate troubleshooting and repairs. By planning for accessibility during the installation process, you can minimize the time and effort required for future maintenance and repairs, and ensure that the Wiremold system remains safe and reliable. The aesthetics of the Wiremold installation should also be considered. While functionality is the primary concern, a neat and professional-looking installation enhances the overall appearance of the space. When notching the ceiling grid to keep the Wiremold flush against the wall, use appropriate trim or covers to conceal the notched areas. Choose trim and covers that match the color and finish of the Wiremold and the ceiling grid. Ensure that the trim and covers are securely attached and do not create any sharp edges or protrusions that could pose a safety hazard. Pay attention to the details of the installation, such as the alignment of the Wiremold sections and the spacing of the supports. A well-executed installation demonstrates professionalism and attention to detail. In addition to aesthetics, consider the impact of the Wiremold installation on other building systems. If the Wiremold is installed near sprinkler heads, ensure that it does not obstruct the sprinkler spray pattern. Sprinkler heads are designed to provide adequate coverage of the area below them. If the Wiremold is located too close to a sprinkler head, it could block the spray and prevent the sprinkler from effectively suppressing a fire. Maintain a minimum clearance of 18 inches between the Wiremold and sprinkler heads. If the Wiremold must be installed closer than 18 inches, consult a fire protection engineer to determine if additional sprinkler heads are required. Similarly, if the Wiremold is installed near heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or HVAC ducts, ensure that it does not interfere with the airflow. HVAC ducts are designed to distribute air throughout the building. If the Wiremold is located too close to a duct, it could restrict the airflow and reduce the efficiency of the HVAC system. Maintain a minimum clearance of 6 inches between the Wiremold and HVAC ducts. If the Wiremold must be installed closer than 6 inches, consult with an HVAC engineer to determine if any modifications to the ductwork are required. The NEC provides comprehensive guidelines for electrical installations, including Wiremold systems. Familiarize yourself with the relevant NEC requirements, such as conductor sizing, wiring methods, and grounding and bonding. Ensure that the Wiremold system is installed in accordance with the NEC and any applicable local codes. Proper grounding and bonding are essential for preventing electrical shock hazards and ensuring the safe operation of electrical equipment. The NEC specifies the requirements for grounding and bonding electrical systems. Follow these requirements carefully when installing Wiremold. Another important consideration is planning for future changes or additions to the building. If the building is likely to be renovated or expanded in the future, plan for these changes when installing the Wiremold. Leave extra space in the ceiling grid or use flexible conduit that can be easily rerouted. Consider the potential for future electrical loads and install a Wiremold system that is capable of handling these loads. Document the Wiremold installation thoroughly. Create a detailed drawing of the installation and keep records of all materials and equipment used. This documentation will be helpful for future maintenance and repairs. It will also be useful if the building is ever sold or leased to a new owner or tenant. In conclusion, notching a ceiling grid for Wiremold penetration requires careful consideration of various factors. By consulting with the building owner, reviewing the lease agreement, complying with all applicable building codes and regulations, and following proper installation procedures, you can ensure that the Wiremold installation is safe, code-compliant, aesthetically pleasing, and functional. Remember to prioritize safety and to consult with qualified professionals when needed. Taking the time to do the job right will pay off in the long run.